Let's get into media this week with Sophie Ellsworth, media writer at The Australian. Thanks for joining us again, Sophie. I've got to tell you what, Andrew Neil, famous British broadcaster and newspaper editor, turns up on Q&A last week on the ABC, and he noticed that everybody they've got on the panel is pro-voice. I said the same when I was on Q&A a year ago, but Andrew Neil mentioned it on the program. Let's have a look.
Where is the strong voice tonight in favour of voting against the voice? I haven't seen it. Whereas a good debate would have had at least one voice saying that.
Good on him. But you could hardly not notice these things, could you, Sophie? They are so biased. And the voice is another one, like climate change, these touchstone issues of the Green left, they just all have the one side.
Well, that's right, Chris. So Andrew spoke a few days after he appeared on Q&A. He was at the Centre for Independent Studies. They held an event. He was a guest speaker and he spoke about his concerns with the public broadcaster and said, look, I couldn't believe I went on this show and there was no one on the hard no side. He was really quite surprised and said, look, when I was at the BBC, we would have never had such a lopsided debate. And no disrespect to Andrew, but this is what goes on at the ABC every day of the week across all of their programs. So to most of us, it's no surprise. But when I asked the ABC about this, of course, they said there's no issue at all. We have various voices and pointed to 7 other people that had on Q&A that were not on that episode. So nothing to see here in terms of them thinking there is a problem with bias.
Yeah, it's garbage, isn't it? For years and years, they hadn't asked me on to Q&A, but then when I'm a prominent yes person on The Voice, suddenly I get invited on, and it was just other yes people. And I mentioned the same thing when I'm on there. Surely this is a contestable idea. We need to have the debate. We need to have the contest of ideas. And we saw this again in an interview that's got a lot of attention. I've focused on this on the program before, where Noel Pearson, who, someone I admire and agree with on The Voice, but he said some really horrible things about another friend of mine, that is Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price. Here's a snippet of it.
Ultimately, it's a tragic redneck celebrity vortex that she's caught up in. Their strategy was to find a black fella to punch down on other black fellas.
Now, I've spoken to Noel Pearson and Jacinta Price about that exchange on this program, but the point is, Sophie, that when the interview was being conducted, the ABC presenter, Patricia Karvelas, didn't push back at all. She just allowed that to be said about someone without challenging it.
Well, Chris, that's the problem. That's the very problem with the ABC, is they don't push back against people they agree with. Why would they? So Noel Pearson is on that program. He's been on that program many times. One interview he got recently with Patricia Karvelas went 16 minutes, virtually uninterrupted, followed by an interview with Paul Fletcher raising concerns about The Voice, and he was constantly talked over, cut off, and he got about 5 minutes airtime. Now, remembering that Patricia Karvelas is the journalist that posted on Twitter a photo with Linda Burney calling her a legend on the night that she won the federal election, or Labor won the federal election. You've got ABC programs, saying that there's white supremacy at Alice Springs town meetings. You've got them pulling the cord when there's a press conference with Senator Price and Peter Dutton because it doesn't fit their narrative. This is rife through the ABC, Chris, and nothing's going to change.
You're so right. They are having a lend of us. They are taking taxpayers' dollars under false pretences because they are supposed to be under law, objective and pluralistic, and they're clearly not. Just very briefly, Sophia, we're nearly out of time, but I know you're very, very interested in the case of Sheng Lai in China. Disgusting that Daniel Andrews went to China, didn't mention her. Mark McGowan's on his way there as we speak, and he's not going to mention her plight either.
That's appalling, Chris. That's right. I spoke to Nick Coyle, Cheng Lai's partner. He was very disappointed in Mark McGowan and Daniel Andrews, who have refused to raise her case. All Nick Coyle is saying is, could they please just raise the issue of her imprisonment with officials? And both these Labor premiers have said they will not do that. In fact, they haven't even returned Nick Coyle's phone calls. This is a woman who has not seen her family for several years.
It is shocking. Thanks so much for joining us, Sophie. We'll keep on that case as well.